Hello, everyone. It's me, Andrew. I'm here in my home in lovely Ligonier, Pennsylvania. It's actually a little less lovely today. I guess you can find the loveliness in it, but it's kind of cold and gray and you know, not my favorite weather. But maybe if you like cold gray days, then it's lovely for you. Um, yeah, so hopefully you all are having a great start to your week. If you didn't see our live yesterday, we had debuted a bunch of new kits that I put together. I have 5 new kits. They are available on our website. That's allegorygallery.com. So if you haven't seen those, check out the videos for replay. William, he would recommend that you watch those replays on YouTube so we get more watch hours. Me, I'm kind of like, well, do whatever is easiest for you. But definitely watch on YouTube if you can and want to. So Cynthia and Azalea, they left. They went back home today. So it's always a little sad when they leave, but we've been seeing a lot of them lately, so that's been good. We It was kind of a whirlwind trip this time because we had the Fort Ligonier days, and so that was pretty busy the whole time that they were here. And then when we got home, we were super tired and trying to finish work up for the next few days. So yeah, I don't know. It seemed a little kind of discombobulated. All right, I see a couple people have joined in. Hey, Teresa. Hey, Michelle. Howdy, Norma. June's watching. Hey, June. Marianne is watching. Hey, Marianne. And hashtag AG Bead Fam. Yeah. So I feel kind of out of sorts today. I think whenever the weather shifts like this pretty dramatically, we had a little bit of snow last night, apparently. I get a little bit of sinus pressure, and that kind of throws me off a little bit. But yeah, so I was going to go to the cottage, but to be honest, I've had one of those kind of crazy makeup days where I'm just running like crazy trying to get all these different deadlines and things sorted out. So I didn't get a chance to go to the cottage. I was there most of the night and this morning. So I can't wait to show you some of the things I've been working on. One of the things that we've been trying to get going is we recently got the fast track into the Handmade Arcade, which is in Pittsburgh. It's a really amazing opportunity. Some people have been trying for 10 years to get in the show and they haven't gotten through the jury process. And because we're in a project called the Acre Project, they have these special sponsored tables, which they've gotten a couple of us into. So that's in the beginning of December. So there's a lot of work to be done. Um, all of the things at this show have to be sold, have to be handmade by you. So it's not like we can bring our beads that we sell in the store necessarily. I have a fair amount of finished jewelry, but it's not necessarily a curated um, collection. So a lot of the times, the stuff that ends up in the store, I make things for the store, but a lot of times it's things that I've has kind of it's kind of a repository for things that have been made over the years. So there isn't necessarily a clear vision for that, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing for the shop. However, when you are planning to do a show or you're creating a new collection, sometimes it's good to map things out beforehand. And and that way the pieces all have kind of a cohesive, harmonious kind of flow to it. And when people see the work, they know that you're the one who made it. So I thought it might be a good idea if I went through some of my kind of plotting and mental exercises that I do to get myself ready for creating a new body of work. I feel like a lot of times there's this, as artists, there's this pressure to create a masterpiece. Um, but the thing is that most artists don't just create only masterpieces. There's a lot of in between work that never gets seen. You only see, the finished work, but you don't necessarily see the preparatory sketches or the plans or the first draft, the second draft, even the third draft. You don't always see those things. So I thought it might be good to take you through some of those thought processes, and that I'm currently going through. For planning for this event. It's a huge event, and I'll get into that a little bit more specifically. So let's turn the camera around, and I'll show you a piece that I just finished up, and then we'll get into the kind of thought mapping. How about it? Hopefully, y'all are having a good start to your week, and everything is beautiful where you are. Yeah, so here, let me flip this around. You'll see the ceiling for a second. And if things go well, I might pop in after a couple hours from now and excuse me, show you some of the things that resulted from this planning session. All right. The one of the reasons why I was a minute or two late is because everything's kind of discombobulated. Like I was trying to find the stand and I couldn't find the stand. Usually it's in the same place, but we move stuff around. All right, so let me zoom in a wee bit. So if you followed along with my journey at Contemporary Craft in Pittsburgh, I was recently one of their artists in residence there. I started at the beginning of the year and was able to go at least once a week. Usually it was 1 or 2 times a week, at least for a couple hours each time. I wish I could have spent more time there. Um, but the gas prices at the time were super high, and I was traveling over 100 miles every day. So it's kind of mind-boggling to me to think about that I traveled like over 2,000 miles in those couple of months, going back and forth. Probably more than that, actually. Anyway, so one of the things that I started doing there is I had this plan that I was going to do a whole series well, I had two plans. I had one plan to do a series of finished, kind of ready to go pieces that would fund my stay there. So I started off by using their hydraulic press to do these stampings, and I probably stamped every single time I went there. Um, and did these impression dies, which I got, and made them into pendants and did things like that. And that was kind of like the ready to wear line. And then I had this idea that I would make a whole series of kind of mythological creatures. I called them my Chimera project. And the thing was that before I had started coming to Contemporary Craft, I had made this series of pieces that I had used with gemstones and the bone faces, and you've seen those if you've been tuning in for a while. But then I kind of had to take a pause because things I couldn't really, I don't know. Sometimes things click together and the plan works out. And I do still intend to do this, and you'll see more of these coming up soon. But while I was there, I kind of got into this whenever, I don't know, I always circle back to doing kind of self portraits, and it's a kind of a check in with myself to kind of see where I'm at, and just kind of you know get the gauge of things. I've been making self portraits since I was um, in art school, and some of them are more representational, and then some of them are less so. Um, I think there's actually one that I have that I went through a whole series where I was painting self portraits, at least one a week. And um, here's one of the ones that I painted. As you can tell, I was a little bit younger then. And this one's in William's office. But anyway, so I do these from time to time, and kind of for me is kind of a palate cleanser. It's something that I can kind of do, and I don't want to say I don't think about things when I do it, but it's something that I look at my face every single day, and it's one of those things that I can kind of just go to. It's like my go-to thing. Besides, I also do a lot of birds. So when I'm going to take a class or something, usually I'll make at least one or two birds. And the reason why is that sometimes when you're thrown into a classroom situation, it's you're not only called to learn a new discipline or a new technique or new material, but you're also asked to create a new thing. And generally speaking, I don't like to try to overinvest in a piece um, while I'm in a class. And what I mean by that is I'm there to learn and not necessarily to make a masterpiece. So my goal is to kind of learn the technique. And I am a little bit of a slow learner. And what I mean by that is, I'm not saying that I'm dumb or anything. And I'm not trying to be overly hard on myself. It's just it takes me a while to kind of conceptually grasp things. So I have to build up a muscle memory and do things with my hands and try it out and do a couple things, and really get that kind of baked into my body and my hand and my muscles and my bones, and then I can kind of take what I've learned and use that and apply it. William, on the other hand, he's a super quick learner, so we'll take classes together sometimes, and he'll just pick something up right away, and he'll just make something really quick, and it's beautiful, and it's perfect, and it's awesome. And he's like, "I made this," and then I'm like, "Oh, that's nice. I'm still on stage one." Um, and the thing about that is he's quick at picking things up, but sometimes it doesn't always. And I know he won't be mad if I say this, because we've talked about this recently. But that information doesn't always stick. So like he'll it's kind of like in high school when somebody crams for a test and they get all straight A's, and then a week later when you ask them about the subject matter, they're like, "Oh, what's that?" And for me, I always struggled. Like in school, I had to like do reading and do all this other extra stuff. But now I can tell you stuff that I learned from back then. And I use it today, kind of. Um, but the stuff that I kind of. So, anyways, here's another one of the self portraits that I made. And this is basically taking my silhouette and cutting it out. If you watch my Instagram stories, that's Andrew T. Thornton 100. I showed how I cut out these shapes. And one of the things that I find very useful to me as a technique is doing something called a variation on a theme. Um, Variation on a theme is a wonderful thing that you can do so that you're not constantly having to come up with the next brilliant idea every single time. Um, Brilliant ideas can come from this, but it's one of those things where if you have a subject matter, you don't have to have something new every single time. I know there are people who, and artists particularly, who don't like to repeat themselves, but I think that makes it sometimes problematic when it comes to showing work in particular. Um, if you're in a gallery setting, sometimes they will not pick people if their body of work seems too disjointed. And one of the reasons why is that in a lot of gallery situations, they want to sell something that is recognizably by an artist. And that is, for me, I like to do the thing that inspires me, and I like to do the thing that I want to do, and I don't care. And I'm going to just do whatever I want. And I think creatively, that's good. um, I think it can keep you fresh and it can keep your ideas flowing. However, I do think that if you're going to be pitching yourself to a gallery or a show, and you don't have a consistent body of work, it can kind of throw people. Um, they kind of want to see an evolution of the work. Also, I was recently talking to a grant writer who most of what she does all day long, um, at least part of the day, is write grants for artists. And she said, sometimes it's good to put yourself out there, even if you're not 100% ready, because at least you're getting yourself in front of the jurors, particularly when it comes to foundation grants, because with foundation grants, they don't always get new jurors. Usually, their selections are internal from their committee. Sorry about that. Their committee of panelists. So, one of the things that's important is to get yourself out in front of them so that they can kind of see who you are and get introduced to who you are. And then if you apply again, if you didn't get it the first time, generally speaking, they said that you usually won't get it the first time. That uh, Afterwards, then they'll see your work and kind of get familiar with it, see you build upon your work, and get to know you that way. So that's one of the things to keep in mind. Um, Teresa says, "Does the piece you are holding come apart, or is it attached?" It's attached. It's soldered in the middle. The pieces originally were not. I had to engineer it in a way that they could slot together and fit together, and then I soldered it in down the seams so that it would hold together. All right. So, what was I saying about the grants and about having a cohesive body of work? So there is something to be said about having a cohesive body of work. There's a wonderful artist who's an abstract artist. I believe he's since passed. His name is Ellsworth Kelly. And if you look at his work, it's very minimal, geometric, clean lines, sculptural paintings that are very saturated chromatic. He would take things like a discarded cigarette case that he found on the ground and then create an abstract sculpture based on that. And it would be like a rectangle with a little corner that's orange. And that's the kind of work that he's known for. However, in his own personal practice, he would do self portraits, and he did a self portrait every year in the style that was at least one self portrait every year and the style that was kind of predominant at the time. So, and he lived for almost 100 years, I believe. So there's a lot of self-portraits and there's a lot of different styles that these self-portraits were done. And I would argue that I like the self portraits more because actually you can see the evolution of the artist through it very clearly, and you can see him experimenting with different styles. However, the body that he presented was the one that he was known for, and that's the one that got, that's the one that people kind of resonated with at the time, and he built a career off of that. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't try new things or that you shouldn't change a thing or feel stifled, that you can't explore new mediums or new ways of doing things. But it is important, I think, especially if you're putting yourself out there in a professional capacity, that you do understand some of your thought processes and why you make things, and how to describe your style. One of the things that I like to do is some word associations. I'm really into words, and so for me, I find it's helpful. I know not everybody works in the way that I do, but I like to come up with words and lists. And I feel that's super helpful for me to kind of clarify. So, one of the things that I always recommend people to do is to go through and look at their own work and come up with 10 words that describes what they're looking at. Um, and that list you can wheedle down into 5 words. And that shows your kind of priority of what is the most important thing when somebody sees your work. What should they take away from that? So I was just showing this piece that I made and just finished recently last night. And so I started this series of self portraits a couple months ago, and that's where these kind of come in, and they're all based off of, if you didn't notice, the same profile, you know. And some people may say that's boring, but generally speaking, you're not going to see all of them all at once and only this for all of time. So I think you can take things that are core essential and build off that, and kind of explore within that. And even though there's 3 different pieces and they use the same silhouette, they're all 3 different iterations and they're very different. So I think it's kind of cool to see that. But anyway, so this piece I started a couple months ago. I did the enameled background, and at the time I was really satisfied with it. I did a texture plate underneath, and then I wet packed transparent enamels on top of it. And at the time, I was like, "Oh, I like this the way it is." And then I did this setting, which is like a prong setting on the back, and I kind of messed up in a couple places. So yeah, there's that. But I was getting a little bit tired, and sometimes with this, if you hit it with a torch a little too close, things can melt, and they can melt really fast, and then it's kind of a pain. But I fixed it, so I think that's a good lesson, that even if something doesn't necessarily work out how you think it will the first time, you can still salvage things, and it's not always a complete loss. I've seen a couple people, they get super frustrated and they throw things in the trash, and I'm like, well, um, yeah. You can do that. Personally, I feel like if you just set something off to the side, generally speaking, something can come out of that later. If nothing else, you can always use it as a teaching moment to kind of examine what went wrong and how you can do it better in the future. So afterwards, I set this, and I was like, something it's not right. And I was going through my feed the other day, and Kristen Fagan has a wonderful group, and it's called Discover Your Magic. Um, And one of the things she says or asked was something like, what does it feel like when something rings true? And I think there's something to be said about being authentic to yourself. So often we get uh, wrapped up in what's popular, what's trending, or the new thing, and we don't always necessarily go back to what is essential and the core. So I feel like it's important when we're making work to hone our artistic instinct, and that means, being able to go to yourself and you say, "Is this good?" And be able to trust that answer. Um, in and sometimes it's hard because there are a lot of times when there are those inner demons that are in the back of our minds that tell us, "Oh, you're not good enough," or "This isn't right," or "This is wrong," or "You're a failure." A lot of these things come from generational trauma and things that other people have told us, and we've kind of adopted those voices and have those floating around in the backs of our minds. So it becomes important to learn to be able to distinguish, um, what is constructive criticism that we can build upon, and what is self doubt, what is self abuse, what is not going to serve our purpose in refining and honing our creative process. So for me, it's tricky, but it's important to learn to harness and develop that sense of instinct where you can look at something that you've made and you said, well, that's great. That's good. I like this. I wish I could have done this better. But that's still not going to make me feel like bad about it. Anyway, so I added the eyes on top. I epoxied them down so that they would be a secure finish. Somebody asked how I attach the eyes. And they're epoxied on with a resin, a two-part resin. And one of the reasons why I did that is, as opposed to setting them, is that sometimes when you set things, you can see the mechanical structures that are used to hold the pieces in place. And that can sometimes take away from that overall aesthetic. So there are a lot of different ways. If I was making this to like fly in an airplane or, this would be, I would maybe engineer it a little bit differently so that, um, and, like there are things that like look good, but aren't always sturdy. I mean, this is really sturdy. I mean, I could roll around on the concrete and feel somewhat secure, but this is glass. This is behind it is a very thin fusing of glass on the metal. So it's already not, I mean, enamel is sturdy, but it's not like the sturdiest. And actually, they used enamel to make things stronger, especially when they're super fine. However, at the end of the day, it's like a couple millimeters of glass. So you kind of have to be careful anyway. So this isn't one of those pieces that you're gonna go into battle and get in a fight and roll around on the concrete. Um, but if you do, that might make it more interesting. But so I use epoxy to get these down, and I think it's nice because it creates a seamless transition between the cabochons and the surface. I know there is a jeweler out there who's watching this who's like rolling and internally groaning and saying, "Oh my gosh, what's he doing now? Telling people to glue stuff on." There's a big, if you didn't know this, there's a big stigma in the jeweler community about using glue. And there are people who are like, I hate glue. I hate it. I'd rather not do it if I had to use glue. I think use whatever's at your disposal. And if it makes you feel more secure, go for it. There are some really beautiful Southwestern Native American pieces where if their stone wasn't perfectly flat on the back, they would pack sawdust in it to cushion the piece. And if you've had one of those pieces, you know that sometimes over time, sometimes that sawdust can shake loose, and you can kind of leave a little trail of sawdust wherever you go. In my mind, a little bit of epoxy in there when you set the stone, it's gonna create a cushion where that's gonna be firmly set in place. And then if you have a good mechanical structure on top of that, then it's like, why not? But you know, like I said, there's somebody out there saying, "Oh no, what's he telling people?" And anyways, so that's how that's made. So I just finished that the other night, and I'm really pleased with this. I was working on this piece to submit to a show, and of course, I took too long to do it, so I didn't get a chance to send this off. But anyways, I finished it, and this will be good for future kind of exhibitions. And I want to continue to build off of this series of work, these self portraits. Even if it's another kind of like side body that I'm working on, I kind of want to still investigate these. So I'm going to continue to make these self portrait pieces and these brooches. And I have a couple new ideas for what I want to do to kind of play upon this idea. Um, and there are certain concepts that just came into my mind. Like we went to this one event where there were all these super famous jewelry people, and at first I was like, oh, I felt myself get a little bit shy. I'm by nature a very shy and introverted person. So when I was in this group, it's taken a lot of time to kind of get to where I can talk to people and be more extroverted and, you know, uh, interact with people without it being too weird. But anyway, so I felt myself kind of get an attack of shyness, and I was like, I didn't know this happened when you're like middle aged, but apparently that can happen. And so I felt myself kind of drifting to the wall, and there's this idea in my mind that popped in about being a wallflower. So one of the pieces that I'm going to make that's a part of this series is going to be called Wallflower, and I'm going to do it, I think, more in the lines of this piece where I have these cutouts, and I'm going to do kind of like the cutouts, but also marry it with like botanicals. um, if you didn't know this about me, I love flowers and I love botanical illustrations and things like that. So I think it might be cool to bridge this kind of anatomical self-portraiture with botanicals. I've done it in a more fantastical sense when I created a body of work called Strange Botany, but I think I want to do it in a more literal way. So we'll see if that happens and if it does happen when it happens, because I have a lot of ideas, and the issue for me is that there is not enough time or energy in the day to do them all. So this comes into what I wanted to do the presentation about today, and it's about planning a collection or body of work. And I've touched on a lot of these things already, but I think I'm going to continue to do that. So one of the things I like to do is start off with a piece of paper. Normally, I work in my idea book, but just makes it a little bit easier to see things because it can lay flat and it doesn't have that big ripple over it. I also like to get a pencil or a pen. I'll settle for either at this point. I have a pencil, so I'll use that. So this is a plan. It's called mapping. So you start off with a goal. So I'm going to be preparing for the Handmade Arcade. That's my goal for this. So one of the things that I'm going to be doing is, when is the Handmade Arcade? The opening night is December 2nd, and the full day is December 3rd, and it's all day. So logistically, I have to plan out, what do we need to do to get there. Well, we have to design a body of work, design work, make work, make work. We have to promote. So usually that means that we will send an email, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, even though we don't use it as much. And I also send out a press release. Usually I send my press release out to the local media. Sometimes they pick up my press releases, sometimes they ignore it, especially because they send out a lot of them, a lot, all the time. And they're probably like, oh no, here he goes, trying to get another story out of us. But I think it's important to do that. Not only does your local community get to know you as an artist, but also um, and what you're doing. But it never hurts to engage with people who are content creators in your area and are going to, you know, hopefully help promote you in your work. So a part of this is also, we're in the acre cohort. So I'm going to make sure to reach out to the acre partners, um, and the other makers, and make sure that they know that we're doing it, and to hopefully have them share about one of their fellow acre cohort members in this show. And that way it's kind of like your network to, hopefully boost your signal. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to scan the list of current and past artists and see if there are any artists that I know from there. I We already did this, and one of our friends named Gina Chalfant, um, she visited us over for Ligonier Days, and William had a chance to talk to her about it. So, what it's always good to get multiple perspectives on a show. So, we've already talked to the show promoter, and they've already told us, their statistics about the show. But I also like to get the impressions from somebody who already does the show. So one of the other things that we have to consider is timing. So there's a lot of time that goes into making the work, obviously, but also one of the things that we have to plan out is travel. This show's in Pittsburgh. So I know that it's an hour and a half there commute, and an hour and a half back. So that generally means that if the show starts at 9 o'clock in the morning, and it takes an hour and a half, I am guaranteed that I'm not going to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. So, or 3 or 4 in the morning to get there and get it there in time, and then be bright eyed and bushy tailed all day. So, one of the things that we're also going to have to consider is hotel, which we already did. So there's a hotel across the street from the convention center, and you can plot out a map of where your show is, and to see what things are nearby. So like gas, if you need to plan out where gas is, where the food is, and how late that food is. So like sometimes if you do a show, before the internet, I shouldn't say before the internet, but before people had phones in their pockets that had the internet, and it was easy to ask, your digital assistant and saying, hey, where's the nearest food near me that's open. you kind of had to know. And so I remember when Cynthia and I used to do shows, we used to have index cards of places that we ate that were was good, and we would sometimes make little notes about stuff about what we ate was good there. And I still every once in a while I'll come across one of them and I'll be like, "Oh yeah, Delectables on Fourth Avenue in Tucson. We ate the gazpacho there, and that was really tasty, and it wasn't super expensive, and it was really fast." And we also make notes about like what's open, because sometimes if you go somewhere and it's like a Monday night here in Ligonier, sometimes there's not a lot open, so you kind of have to plan for that. I remember one time we had visitors come and it was kind of we came early and we came on like maybe a Sunday night on Easter, and there was nowhere to eat. And so we ended up having to go home and cook. But if we had known beforehand, we could have planned out, you know, that we could have planned out that we were making food beforehand and saved like 2 hours of looking around and going from place to place, kind of like Mary and Joseph trying to find some place to stay at the inn. Um, so, anyways, it's good to plan out these things so that you can have that accessible to you. So that goes into some of the planning of the logistical side, and that's kind of the logistical. Um, and this is how we're going to do the show and get that kind of going. All right. And there's more stuff like, usually it's like how much does a table fee cost? And how much is gas? How much is your trip? How much is your hotel? Um, and what that does is say a table fee is 300, the hotel is 150. It costs about I don't know, 50 bucks in gas to do it. And you have food. Um, so say you do $10 a meal, which if you're, with inflation, that's if you're lucky, that's 3 meals a day. If you eat 3 meals a day, and that's what, 60 bucks because there's me and William, or so a day. So that's 2 days. So it's at least 120. And then you come up with this list, and then you have your bare minimum of what you have to make. One, four, five, uh, and six. All right. So you have to make at least this much to cover expenses. So that's important to know when you're trying to get that break even mark. And I should have checked this math with a calculator, but that early arithmetic or whatever. I'll put this in there right there in case the math is wrong. Um, so the next thing is the body of work. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to ask how many people attend a show. If it's a lot of people, there are 10,000 people that come through the door for this show. So there's 10,000 people who attend. Um, the thing about that is not everybody is going to like the things that you make. That's just a given. But uh, and I don't. I kind of am of the opinion that you should make what you want to make, in the idea that the people who understand and recognize like the artistry behind it are going to be your people, and not everybody's going to be your people. There's different mindsets of how to kind of create a selling strategy, and one of those things is kind of like the Walmart mentality, where you make the most stuff at like the most sales at the cheapest price, and kind of just have like a flood of kind of domination over the marketplace, at least for that. And that's One way to do it, I feel like as an artist with limited resources, or at least not the resources that Walmart has, I have to shoot a little bit higher. So for me, it's kind of creating well curated things, artist made things, and charge a comparable and reasonable price, but not to undercut myself. Because if I sell things for too little, I'm actually doing what's called a race to the bottom. So even though it may not seem like that, and you be like, oh, I have a fistful of cash, sometimes your expenses are more than what you're pulling in. And it may feel like you're making a ton of money, especially if you're set up next to somebody who is not making as many frequent sales. Like there is one show we went to, and we went to the show for probably 10 years. And I'm not going to say which show it is because you can almost figure out who I'm talking about. And we were always busy. There's always people at the booth, and we were busy, busy, busy all weekend long, all weekend long. Across the way from us, there was somebody, and it looked like they were maybe bored to tears. And there was maybe one person, you'd see them every once in a while, there'd be somebody there. And eventually, after one of the shows, we were like, "Oh, how you doing? And how's the show going for you?" And "Oh, how's the show going for you? I noticed there's not a lot of people around." And they were like, "Oh, the show's excellent." And then we were like, "What? What? We hardly see anybody over there." And one of the things that then they said, uh, the thing is what you're doing is mostly retail and small wholesale. And they said, what I do is I will make one sale and set my whole year up through that one sale. So through one engagement and a higher price point, they made quadruple what we were making at these little ones and twos kind of sale. And so you kind of have to think about your market. And if you can do that, like where is the best, like what is going to be the best for you kind of for your own selling strategy. The thing that they did is they worked in um, this kind of laboratory glass kind of situation where the pieces that they made were very expensive, and or I shouldn't say expensive, but they were not inexpensive, and they were highly technical. And so the deals they were making were 100,000 as opposed to a lot less. So anyways, so it's good to know how many people are going to attend the show, and then what the average price point per sale. Now, it's easy if you've done this show before because you can look back through your records and see what sold the best. If you sold, I used to do this festival, and I would make these necklaces and sell them for $20 a pop. And I sold them until I couldn't make them anymore. I would just sell them, sell them, sell them. And it was like nonstop selling these $20 necklaces where I took a piece of leather and put a bead on it and tied it up, and that was it. Um, and so I used to sell a ton of those. But then, you kind of have to look back and see. So to get this, sometimes it's tricky because sometimes it requires you to talk to an artist that who've done the show before and hope that they're willing to share that with you. Or if you can talk to your show promoter and see what they're thinking is their average price. Um, when we talked to them, they said that the sales that did the most were around $20 to $40 were the best sellers of there. One of the anecdotal stories they had is there's a person who sells bath bombs and stuff, and they made I think $12,000 through $7 bath bombs. I cannot even imagine how much they had to sell. Well, actually, you get a calculator out and figure it out, but that's a ton of bath bomb. Um, Now, the thing that's going to be the middle figuring out point is volume and how much can you realistically make. My thing, one of my biggest stumbling blocks in my life is that I will bite off more than I can chew. I'm like, I'm gonna make this, and this, and this, and so it becomes somewhat hard for me sometimes to do fulfillment. So for me, going forward in my life, since I recognize that I bite off sometimes more than I can chew, it's important for me to have kind of a logistical plan so that I can understand what is feasible, what I can actually do and accomplish, and then kind of work within that superstructure so that I can kind of create the body of work that I want to make. So I understand that I'm going to need either fewer pieces at a higher price point, which means that I may make fewer sales, or have more pieces at a lower price point. But if I do that, I'm going to have a lot of pieces. So within that kind of structure of knowing that, I think about what can I make that I can sell at a show like this and that people can kind of grab and go. So I have necklaces, bracelets, rings, earrings, and prints. All right. I can generally keep some of these things to this price point. The issue is that necklaces, if I do that, I have to focus on like a centerpiece and have this be like a chain and focus on this, the focal point, as opposed to doing the whole thing. Um, Now, bracelets are tricky because bracelets, you have is a sizing thing. So bracelets, if you don't have the right size, you can make somebody super upset if they try to get a small bracelet and they have a larger wrist size and then it won't fit. I've seen people cry at shows because they can't get the bracelet on. So I am less inclined to do bracelets unless I can do an adjustable bracelet that has kind of an extender chain or something that I can make a lot of in different sizes, because it's so like I think the goal of this of any show is what is it what is the customer's needs and their wants, and how can you answer that question. When I asked them about the Handmade Arcade, I said, "What is this a primarily is this what kind of show is this?" They said that it's mostly for gifts for the holidays, and they also said that this has become a show that boutiques and small retail will shop. So the thing about that is if you're going to start doing becomes a little bit of a different situation. So what that means is if you're going to be you're making something that has to be resold, um, you have to think about your price points in a very different way. Generally speaking, if you're going to sell wholesale, it's usually what's called Keystone. And Keystone is a 50-50 split. So if your product is marked at $20, you have to sell that for $10 wholesale. So that means that if you have a $10, if you're going to sell it to them for $10, you have to have your at least your margins covered. So sometimes that you have to make your thing cost $5, or depending on your markup, um, is depending on how what your margins are called. So if you do if you just want to double what you make, that's going to be your cost of materials is going to, and time is going to be $5. So that means that that's probably going to be something that you can do relatively quickly and relatively inexpensively. So if I had to do that, I'd probably do earrings to kind of fill that gap. Um, Now, there are some things that you can probably do that you can kind of mass manufacture in a sense. So if you find a good supplier for charms or for whatever, lasered components or things that you're not going to have to do one at a time individually, and it takes you forever and a day, um, that will help kind of narrow that down. And that didn't sound like that made sense. But basically, it's finding reputable places that you can find materials that you can keep and keep the cost to what is appropriate to your customers. Now you're being like, how does this play into what is possible? So for me, if I'm going to make a print, I'm going to make a print of a painting, and the painting will take, depending on how big the painting is and how much time I put into it, it can take a day to a week. So about 3 days to do the finished work. And then if I have it being printed by a professional printer, turnaround time is generally a week, sometimes sooner if you pay more. And so that's 3 days. To package those prints, generally speaking, you have to package those prints. That's usually all day. So that's one day. So this is a whole week, 1 week of work. And this is just without even coming up with the concept. This is for painting, the original, printing, packaging. So this is 1 week of work. This is when the show is. The show is December 2nd to December 3rd. And generally speaking, you're not going to be doing it while you're driving. Sometimes I've done that. If William's driving, I'll sit and do work while I'm doing it. But that means that I've got to budget at least 1 week out of the however many weeks. So that's the beginning of December. So I have all of November. And so there are things like, well, this is the printers at this 3 days. I can also budget other things. So I'm not just like sitting idly waiting for the prints to complete. So it's not like a whole solid 1 week, but that's a 1 week turnaround time. And we have what, 4 weeks in November. And then there's like 1 week, 1 or 2 weeks left of October. So we have about 6 weeks. So I only have 6 weeks to produce the series, and I already have budgeted 1 week for prints. And prints, generally speaking, I'm going to charge probably about $20 for a print. That's kind of around the going rate. Sometimes people charge more. I feel like if you charge more, you're going up into like fancier, larger sizes, or archival processes like giclée prints, or hand embellishing them, or your average price of your prints are higher. So mine are generally about $20 for a print. Um, and with that in mind, from my own prints, I can realistically budget maybe I'll sell 100 prints. I don't know. If there's 10,000 people, hopefully I'll sell maybe 100 prints. But, I don't know. Like, that's the thing is you never know when you're doing like a first time show about how well certain things are going to do. I'm going to be conservative and try to do, I don't know, maybe a run of 20 prints for each of the different designs that I create. And then that way I can have kind of a blanket of different possibilities. And that's something I can also reorder in the future if there are any kind of boutiques or small business that I can work with to wholesale. I can keep my and maintain my margins. But I also have to think about, like with rings, rings are another thing that the sizes can be tricky. The other thing about that is that they're easy, it's super easy to walk away, and people can, I don't want to say they're going to steal, but sometimes people steal things. Rings are one of those things that is super tricky to keep down with theft. But they can be really good sellers because you can kind of gauge. They're small. They don't necessarily take up a ton of table room. You can keep back stock behind the table and replace it. Necklaces on your table space will take up the biggest square footage, but they can also be the biggest ticket items. So, and also just depends like what your materials are, of course. Excuse me. But so you kind of have to factor that in also is how much table space, we call it real estate, but how much can you fit on the table, and in what ways can you maximize your real estate? I've seen people come to shows and they've only have like a couple things to sell, and then they're disappointed when they don't have a lot of sales. And it's like, well, if you don't have a lot of inventory to sell, you're not necessarily going to have, um, you're not going to necessarily have the inventory to move to get to make the numbers that you want to make. So after I figured out all of this stuff, I know it's not the most interesting. And if you've done shows before, you're probably like, oh my gosh, she's going over the basics 101. After you get through all of this, then it comes to what am I interested in? Well, I know that I'm going to try to make some paintings, and I'm going to try to get some, at least a few necklaces made. I'm gonna probably not make that many bracelets. You never know. I may make some bracelets, rings, and earrings. So I'm gonna probably focus my energy on making necklaces because they're the biggest, highest price points for me. And I'm going to also try to focus on earrings and prints because I can automate that a little bit and it's not all on me necessarily. I may make a tray of rings and I may make a tray of bracelets. Brooches, I feel like I can maybe make brooches. However, historically, brooches are not something that sells super well. Um, and one of the things about that is it also depends on where you live. Um, where I live, it gets pretty cold, and brooches are not uncommon. But if you're in like a tropical place, unless you're working with something super lightweight and maybe magnetic on the back so it doesn't like puncture your fine thin fabrics, um, you kind of have to keep that in mind because I've seen where people will make like a whole series of these really big heavy brooches and then nobody buys them because they're big and heavy and they live in a hot place and they're like, well, this is going to ruin my tank top. So that's maybe something also to consider is like where you are geographically, and also if you want to invest the time in that. Like if I had more time, I might make a couple, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. So for me, I'm going to focus on the necklaces and the earring. So things that I'm kind of interested in right now are I'm interested in recycled materials. I kind of have been thinking about sustainability a lot. I have a lot of different kind of bits and baubles that I've collected over the years. I'm a little bit low key hoarder style. So I have a lot of these things. Um, um, that are kind of floating around. One of the nice things about kind of that repurposed and recycled and upcycling is that a lot of times the materials can be low cost. Um, Meaning that they can be free found objects, things that I can get in junk lots, things that I can take apart. So that's a nice thing because then that can translate into what I'm going to when it comes into factoring in the price. If I'm going to be working with diamonds, automatically the intrinsic value of that material is much higher, which in some cases can be good if your clientele can support that. But we've previously talked to the show promoter, and they said that their generally their price point is $20 to $40. And I don't know about you, but I can't make a diamond ring for $20 to $40, or even double that. I can't. I may be able to make like a tiny little one and just a simple band, like a stacker. But so I know if I want to kind of create pieces that are going to fit this market, I'm not going to invest in like super expensive gemstones. I'm going to save those for another show, or think about how ways that I can replicate that look. And I have a couple ideas about that, but I'm not going to share all of my secrets because I still want some things to be interesting for me, and also if I can't do it or not. So what this does is what does this bring to mind? So when it comes to repurposed items, I kind of think of collages and assemblages. And basically an assemblage, that that is not how you spell that. I put assembles, but that's kind of like the same thing. So an assemblage is basically a 3D collage. So artists like Louise Nevelson was really prominent in creating assemblages. There's also Joseph Cornell. He created these collages that were kind of like tableaus and little cigar boxes and things like that. And those are kind of considered assemblages. Michael Dement, or Demang, Michael Demang is an artist who wrote The Secret of Rusty Things. And he's used to be known a lot for his assemblages. So he would take kind of like mannequins and put things on them and then paint on them and do surface treatments to change them. And Louise Nevelson, she was known for kind of taking different blocks and geometric shapes and stacking them and creating kind of volume from this geometric kind of found objects in a lot of ways, and then painting them all black or painting them all white. So that it then became about like shifts and the highlights and the shadows and different things like that. So I kind of think that that's one of those things that's kind of interesting, where I can take things of disparate backgrounds and merge them into one thing and kind of coalesce them into one body and form. And I actually went to school for collage, so I might kind of play into that. I also work, so this is going to become a bigger thing, is collage. Thematically taking things of different backgrounds. This is things of two different background, two things of two or more background, and merging them into one thing. Does it sound familiar? For me, I come from, my parents are of a background. My mom's from the Philippines, and my dad is white, and he grew up in Missouri and the Ozarks. So this process of collage marries into my process thematically. So the technique matches the theme of my kind of interests in there. I work with a lot of narrative jewelry and things that tell stories. I'm really interested in stories and how people tell stories. So I will work with a lot of things that include references to the human body, um, faces, fantasy, mythology, mythology, um, and kind of these, I call them my little monsters. And really, a monster was anything that was out of the normal. And So there are things that I like that are kind of like anthropomorphic, mashups of, like I said, to the collage, where it's of two different things of two different backgrounds. So things like a minotaur is half bull and half human, centaur half part horse and part human. So there are these things that kind of play into that, and it's going to come back into the idea of the chimera for me. Um, and so that's another thing that I'm interested in, is how can I make these little monsters and chimeras, and then still fit the budget. So I'm feeling like I'm gonna be kind of utilizing some of these repurposed items, which I already have a lot of, and I can kind of work thematically so it's not so out of left field. So if I started working they can find gold and setting $15,000 stones, it's going to seem kind of odd unless I can find a way to kind of coalesce these ideas. So for me, it's all finding the material that is going to kind of match symbolically the themes that I'm trying to express. So another thing that I'm kind of interested in, like I've been doing earlier, and been doing these kind of variations on a theme, is taking something like this and somehow making this a little bit more accessible. Um, I think accessibility is an important thing for me. So I'm going to try to experiment, if I can find the time within my 6 week timeline, because not only is it 6 full weeks of work, there are also holidays, there are previous commitments. So that time gets wheedled down less and less. And that's where a schedule becomes kind of important, where you can start then budgeting your time and being realistic about. So next week, or this weekend coming up, is the Great Bead Extravaganza. Friday night, we have the preview party. And then on Saturday, our presentation is in the morning. So that means, generally speaking, I'm going to be getting ready for that the rest of this week. So making sure that everything, like we've got all our the things we want in there for sale and get that ready to go. If I'm going to make anything special for that, that's going to happen between now and then. So I have to plan appropriately and realize that if I'm making stuff for this, I'm not necessarily going to have time to work on this project. So being realistic with the schedule of production is also a good thing. The other thing to consider is if you can get outside help to help you assemble different things. For instance, one of our friends, she makes these stuffed animals and they're so stinking cute. But her problem is she can only crochet so fast for so long every day before she just physically can't do it anymore. So one of the things that she's been doing is she's been outsourcing people to do like the legs and the bodies or whatever, and then she goes and takes those and kind of uses those pieces and stitches them together and puts together her pieces that way. So that way, she can kind of be able to do more with what she can physically, more than what she can physically do on her own. And it's not necessarily essential that, this round shape that anybody could make, it's not essential that she has to do that. It's kind of like with beads, like you could learn to make every single component. um like you can learn to do glass and you can learn to cut stones and you can learn to do this and you can go to the mines and you can do that, or you can buy the beads already made and use those and utilize them in your pieces and trust in their expertise and their be able to do that. So anyways, I've kind of steamrolled, and I'm gonna see if I have any questions. I see a lot of comments about my pieces. There, Teresa says, so beautiful, very unique, very cool. Bonnie says, I agree on many of your points about self-awareness with your pieces. Um, Bonnie says they use glue to seal boats. They do marine grade sealants. Bonnie says, is that your profile? It is. Marion says, correct arithmetic. Thanks. Bonnie said, this is why I never try these shows. It's overwhelming for me. The thing about this is if you break it down into manageable steps, and if you're not on such a tight timeline, I feel like this is an incredibly tight timeline for the what I want to do. um, a part of this also, the logistics, is then having packaging, the right packaging, having all of that made, making sure we have business cards, making sure we have boxes, making sure we have bags. um, and then on the day of, you have a calculator, you have your card reader, you have scissors, you have things like your tape, things like that you're going to need on the day of. So there is some planning also that goes into that. And usually I spend at least a day. One of the things that I do when I get ready for a show like this is I'll do what's called a dry run. And so I will set up a table in our living room or dining room or wherever, and have a table and put all the things out and rearrange them and then kind of make a map. And then what I'll do is I'll take pictures of the table and pack up all of the displays in boxes so that when I get there the day of, I don't have to think about how things will fit, because I already know. I just set up the table, put the tablecloth down, or put the table risers on, put the tablecloth down, and then just assemble the puzzle according to the like paint by numbers, and then I have everything ready to go. Um, and so when you can kind of create processes that will streamline your kind of go moments, it makes it a lot easier. Um, instead of like frantically rushing around for that clamp that's going to hold down that light. If you have all of that ready beforehand, when you get there, then you just kind of have to put it up and it's done. And it takes a lot of that anxiety and pressure off. I know that this can seem overwhelming, but I think that when you start to break things down by making a plan for yourself, it actually makes it a lot easier. Um, for instance, if your approach is to make whatever you want, um, and it will be what it will be, it can get kind of, I feel like that's more stressful because you don't necessarily have those parameters to work in. Like if you have infinite amount of space, then maybe you can make some large scale sculptures, but then you have to kind of know your market. And at this handmade arcade that we're going to do, I don't think that large scale sculptures are necessarily what's going to do it. So I have to think about like affordability, accessibility, what is small and can um, will create that resonance of who I am as an artist, and will capture the materials of that, and reflect who I am as an artist, but also work within the parameters. It's kind of like a little creative challenge that you kind of give yourself. And, maybe I'll make some oddball things that are outside of it. I generally do. But for me, I kind of have a rough working plan of what I have to do in my mind. And also, whenever I start a new series or new body of work, I always like to do a color palette, and I'll make a color wheel. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll take clippings from magazines or things that I've seen on the internet, printouts, and we'll create kind of a collage that I can use as like my touchstone. And what I mean by that is sometimes I'll have a thing called a guidebook or a design guide. And that means that like if it doesn't fit within that design guide, then maybe I should leave it for another day, especially if I have time constraints. Um, or does it fit within these? Like if I have a color palette that's all fuchsia pink, teal, and black, and I make something that is red, white, and blue, and it doesn't necessarily fit, I may not include that. Um, you know, it may seem kind of weird that if you make something, you're like, oh, I should definitely may include everything I make. Um, I don't know. I don't always think that that's true. I think sometimes it's better to just focus on, especially if you're working within a deadline, to focus on the things that you can do and do realistically. And then it becomes less overwhelming if you know you only have a limited color palette to work with, or that your material things, you're going to try to do this process. Um, if I'm going to stick with affordable pieces, I'm going to probably leave the sapphires out, and save those for my bigger pieces. Because those are a little bit spendy, and I may make one or a few of them, or bring along some that I have already made in my like under the table kind of situation. But it's all about kind of creating those systems that's going to best benefit you, so that you can reach your customers and deliver your message in the most effective way. Um, Lorraine says, great idea. Bunny says, that's good advice. Lorraine says, thanks, Andrew. This was very informative, and I wish I knew all of this a long time ago. To many trials and errors, many lessons learned. Um, yeah, I think it's one of those things like when I first started doing shows, I was doing shows for other people, and I made mental notes of what was hard about those shows and what was easy. Um, what was easy was when everything's kind of planned beforehand, and you just get there, and then you can just focus on selling. And having everything priced beforehand is so helpful. pricing things beforehand, even though you just take a day to price things, um, then you're not frantically kind of rushing around the day of trying to come up with prices, seeing if there's a sticker, a sheet of stickers somewhere. You can just have everything ready. And so when you go, then you can focus on like talking with the customers and not being kind of like frantically still trying to set up. So there are a lot of different things that you can do to make your own life easier. And I feel like at this point, I am not interested in the hard road anymore. We've went through all the trial and error. I know that for me, it can be very hard on my body if I don't plan ahead. So I've got my plan of attack now. So now all I have to do is execute that plan. I think it'll be interesting to see now that I've publicly shared this information with you to see what we come up with. I'm really curious to see how this is going to turn out. Now that I've shared all these kind of thought processes behind planning our show out and this new body of work. Um, and I'm excited. I think it's kind of intriguing to see where things will go. And I hope that you all are kind of excited too to see what will happen next as well, especially when it comes to making things. This part is kind of dull for some people. I know that, when it comes to like watching somebody write on a piece of paper, it's not necessarily the most exciting thing. It's kind of like getting the PTSD from being in like I don't know, in school or whatever from I don't know. But for me, I think it's good to give yourself a framework. And once you have that framework, it kind of is then you can play. That's the fun part. You can, if you say, hey, I'm going to give myself an hour to kind of just play around with these materials, see what happens, put them in weird combinations, and let's see what happens. I think that's exciting. So, anyways, hopefully you all got something out of that. I'm gonna flip the camera around. Hello. So, was that useful for you all? Did you think that that was useful, or uh, was that I don't know. Did you all find that empowering? I know somebody said that they were kind of overwhelmed by it. But I feel like it's a good thing to know. Bunny says yes. Thank you. So anyways, we've got a busy week ahead, and I want to make sure that we go over some of the things so that we're all on the same page. Friday night is our preview party for the Great Bead Extravaganza. Um, be sure to print off your schedules if there are people who you in particular want to watch. The videos are available on replay. I will say that for people who are doing giveaways or sales or things like that, time sensitive things, sometimes there are time sensitive things in the Great Bead Extravaganza. Um, so it is good to watch things live, um, because sometimes you can miss out on stuff if you come after the fact. Somebody they messaged us and they said my coupon code's not working, and I was like, what coupon code? And they were like GBE 2021, and I was like, that's an old code. I mean that's old at this point. And so they're like, "What? You mean you didn't just film this?" And it's like, "No, that was last year." And that I can't really do that. So if you are interested in being caught up with those time sensitive things, I do recommend printing out a schedule. I printed out mine. It's over there. I would reach for it, but it's just out of reach. And so I print out my schedule. I've made sure to block out the time that I'm going to spend. We have a busy weekend that weekend, so it's going to be kind of crazy to kind of balance everything out. But I'm going to still try to watch all of them. I try to watch all of them. Um, and keep an eye on the comments to make sure that everything's running smoothly. Um, Suzanne says, yes, useful. Robin says, so much great information. Thank you, Andrew. So I know it can seem overwhelming. And for me, like I said earlier, I think I like to make lists and I like to um, do mapping of my ideas and process. Um, and what I'm going to do now that I have these two sheets is I'm going to boil these two sheets down into an action list. So it's going to be boom, 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 boom. I'm going to look at a calendar and I'm going to say, what can I do and fit it in where? That's going to be the trickiest part, is to sit down with William and go through our calendar and see when is the very last day that we can send prints to get printed, when is the very last day that we can order certain things. And then that way, I mean, it's kind of stressful to create deadlines. I used to be of the opinion that deadlines were bad, that they are crazy making. And the reason why I felt that way is because I had worked in two kind of careers. I worked in journalism and I worked in food service. Journalism, if you don't have your stories done at a certain time, if you don't have your editing and copywriting done, then A, it doesn't get published. B, you're gonna have an empty spot in your publication. And C, if you print something and it's not good or the information is wrong, people will tell you about it. They'll say this information is wrong, and you'll get just all this hate mail. Food industry, if you got a ticket, you got to make the food because otherwise somebody's going to be disappointed and they're going to let you know about it. And you're either not going to get tipped, or people are going to get upset, or they're going to leave a bad review. There's a lot of different things that go into that. So I used to associate deadlines with like trauma. I'd be like, I don't want any deadline. But as I get kind of older and work in a career that I actually am more passionate about, I start to realize that having deadlines are useful to budget your time so that you can then have um, you can then have that time. You can have that time. Um, you can have the time to make the thing that you're going to make, and then also what you're going to do after that. You can have time to enjoy. It's not just like this constant grind of your bones into ashes and dust, and your only thing is you're just like a meat suit just to pay bills. You can actually enjoy things and be able to take the time, if you know this is your time to create, and you can use that time and not be stressed out about the other thing that is pressing on your mind. You'll know that you have a time and a place to handle that other thing, and that you have systems in place that will make it easier for you to do the things that you actually enjoy doing. So, yeah, I know it's a lot, and it's not necessarily always the most fun making, but I think it can be useful, and hopefully it's useful to you. If you use any of these techniques, let us know. Um, if you are in our design challenge group, let us know if you use any of these tools, because they are tools. It's the Allegory Gallery Design Challenge group. Right now, it's mostly just things that people use that we make. But if we empower you with a conceptual tool, you can let us know that you use that as well. I know our friend Anne, she was getting an idea book, and I think she showed a picture of her idea book in the design challenge group. And I was like, that's great. Sometimes the things that we impart are beads and physical items. But if you use a technique that we show on one of these lives, or like a beading technique or a journaling technique or a thing like that, we'd like to see that as well. So yeah, Marion says, thank you for this perspective on creating. When I'm creating, and it's just for my own personal and my own personal investigations, I don't necessarily put these limits. When I'm making the self-portraits, I don't necessarily put the same kind of parameters on that. I do put parameters in that if I'm going to apply for a show and I want to use that piece. And when I say I'm applying for a show, usually it's a call for entry for an exhibition. If I'm going to apply and use that piece for that, then I have some deadlines that I have to work within. But this is kind of like, this is very time sensitive planning that I have to do to ensure that I have a good and the most optimal show experience. I also like to come up with contingency plans. So if I make all this work for this show and it bombs and nobody buys it, I like to have a backup plan. And one of my backup plans, that if we have a not so awesome show, then we're going to have a holiday open house. And we were thinking about having one of those anyways for the shop. I want to think of something that we can do digitally. Maybe we'll have a creative make along, so that all of you out there who may not be local can kind of participate as well. But anyways, I think it's good to know that sometimes these things are considered, for better or for worse. I don't know. I think they're useful to me, so hopefully they'll be useful to you. All right. Well, I hope you have a great rest of your week. We'll be back tomorrow with more things. William, he's going to go. He has some errands to run earlier in the day. They're picking up pellets for the wood stove. So probably either tonight or tomorrow, we're going to do a good heavy clean out of our wood stove. We did a kind of a general clean out at the end of the season, but I really want to get in there and like really scrub it, so that we don't have any issues with like buildup or residue or whatever. And then we also have a car appointment, I think. I don't know. All right. Well, hopefully you have a great rest of your week. We'll be back tomorrow. If I can tune in tonight, I will share some of the things that I have made using this plan. I'm going to spend a little bit more time making a bullet sheet for myself where I can kind of map things out of what I can do and how much time I'm going to do it in. I've got some ideas. I might use some frozen Charlottes and make some little critters that way. We'll see. Yeah, so hopefully you have a great rest of your week. Thanks for stopping in and tuning in. Be sure to grab anything that you need from our website. That's allegorygallery.com. If you were curious to see who won with our friendly competition, William won. We'll have to determine what his prize is for winning. He outpaced me in sales 3-1 this weekend. So that is exciting for him. Also, if you got anything in one of our folders that we set up on my timeline or in the DStash group, if you are waiting for invoices, I've already started invoicing some people, but there are still some that I haven't gotten a chance to. Those should happen tonight or tomorrow. So keep an eye out for those. Generally speaking, whenever we send out an invoice that's like this weird discombobulated way I did it, I send a message and say, "Hey, did you get the invoice?" And yeah, that's how we do that. Normally, they have their own system, William and Barb and all that. They have a more streamlined system than my funky way of doing things. But yeah. All right. I'll see ya. Have a great week, everybody.